Hi, so this is a recording of a talk which I've done for HQN about leadership, ethics, and the practical use of AI in social housing. This talk was an absolute delight to put together because I'd had some time to think over a holiday period, and this talk has got three sections to it: a section about leadership, a section about ethics, and a section about the practical use of AI, all in social housing. And I'm hoping that this will provide a really interesting way of thinking about each of those topics. And it was a nice brief, to be honest. So I think it's important you understand a bit about where I'm coming from with the work that I do. So I've got a PhD in AI, which I did after spending about 10 years in data science teams, so particularly in retail. But I was working all around the world. So I was working in India, in Iceland, in Poland, did some small amounts in the US, etc. So I'd had a broad exposure and made a bit of an impact in lots of different areas. So I mentioned retail, but it was also things like defense, gaming, supply chain, shipping, all that sort of stuff. But all about data-driven decisions and using data to make an impact in the sectors which I was serving. So now what I do is I still do half my time outside of housing, and I think that's really important for us to be at the bleeding edge of things. And my business partner does the same. And I advise housing leadership teams about AI. What that really means is kind of the digital family of things, but particularly about data. And the brief normally is about AI, but it tends to touch on quite a lot more than that, as I think we'll discuss in a moment. I chair Haley, so this is housingai.org, and we're making reusable sector assets. So you might have seen our TSM dashboard. So if you're in England, you've got the tenant satisfaction measures, and the regulator of social housing publishes those. And we've made a software tool to make it easier to navigate that and to get insights without having to run it yourself. Sort of bringing some of the data science capability to housing providers sort of at scale so we can learn on that wider data set. I'm president of Manchester Statistical Society, which was founded in 1833, so it's the oldest statistical society still continuing in the world. And I serve on the board of a registered provider which has 12,000 homes also in Manchester. So I live and breathe the kind of problems that you're facing in that half of my time where I focus on social housing. For this talk, reinvention is going in a box, right? So you'll sometimes hear me talking about how we can be using Gen AI in radical ways. This isn't that talk. This is not to do with that. So I just want to make it clear in terms of scoping, putting that in a box for now. So this is the leadership bit. I think we need to be thinking about this is about AI leadership, but I think it's quite instructive to think about where our leadership comes from in general. So you might be thinking, oh, it comes from my chief exec. Well, I think I'll try to paint a bit of a picture about how I think that's not entirely true. So this is my kind of visualization of the solar system that is social housing. So if you look at Earth, so that's our residents. So that's the people that we're serving, and arguably that also includes people on the waiting list. You've got housing associations, which are attempting to serve those residents. But everything's kind of orbiting around the UK government. So that's particularly MHCLG, which is using things like the regulator of social housing and the housing ombudsman to influence the sector. Then there's other things like NHF. So if you're in England, or the Scottish Federation, or Community Homes Cymru, if you're in one of the devolved nations. CIH, so our professional body, got hacked, so doing really important things like the data standards. Local authorities, and so if you're, the relationship changes depending upon whether you're an ALMO or whether you're actually run by the local authority, but all of us have some interaction with local authorities and some of the services that they run. Membership bodies like this one, like HQN, but also people like Vantage or Acuity. Financial providers are stakeholders in this ecosystem as well, and they're really influenced by all of what's going on here, as are the consultancies of all sorts of flavors, including myself. Right? If we think about where the leadership comes from in this whole ecosystem, it doesn't come from the housing associations, right? So the chief exec is often very strong in a housing association, but the real leadership, you might think, well, okay, it's the regulator, but the regulator is just doing their job in terms of doing what the government has told them to through legislation that's been passed. So the power here, we've got like things like Homes England also, the power is all coming from the UK government. And I think it's really important to understand this ecosystem, because what that means is that the leadership, so things like the decision to make decent homes, not just the standard, but the decision to invest in homes to bring them up to a particular standard, is essentially coming from the government. And it's coming for good reason, but it's coming from the government via the regulator, being implemented by the landlords. And that sort of dynamic is what we see play out in terms of the leadership, in terms of how the sector develops itself. With digital, the leadership comes quite a lot from the consultancies and the software vendors, is my view. And that actually the leadership is residing there rather than with, for example, the housing associations. And in part, that's because the regulator and the government sort of has let people get on with it. So registered providers can do as they please, by and large. If you're involved with the local authority, there might be some constraints the local authority apply on their sort of IT architecture. And you can kind of see that manifesting in the way that HACT has stepped in to try to help support with the data standards. So there's lots of moving parts here. It's very complex, as you know from working in the sector. But the leadership in AI, where is that going to come from? Left to its own devices, it probably comes from the same place that the digital leadership comes from, which is from vendors trying to make money from it. Okay, so let's see how we get on. So AI does something to this ecosystem. It does something in particular to our feedback loops. So let's think, this is the kind of classic, kind of bad, but classic pattern that we have. So step one, need a repair, doesn't get done properly by a stretch provider, customer complains. Trust is lost, we get a scrutiny increase, we get wasteful rework. And then the regulatory pressure increases, which increases the financial pressure, which then means that the repair doesn't get, and we loop round. Okay. AI can change parts of this. So this is the most important loop, arguably, in this whole cycle, because this is how we're maintaining our homes to a decent standard, and it's about how effectively we're able to do that. AI changes that. So this is going to be the yellow bits on top here. So starting on the top right, AI can be used to better understand and listen to the customer needs, transparent data and AI governance, real-time regulatory monitoring. It's not where they're going in the short term, but better, arguably, more efficient than all-consuming periodic ones. Efficient and effective processes, because we can optimize it, because we're using the data to understand it better. More efficient housing associations mean that we'd have better access to finance, which means we can build more social housing. If we're doing predictive repairs instead of responsive ones, we'll be getting fewer complaints because people will be happier in their homes because they're not having broken things. And overall, this AI means that we will get much faster versions of this loop. Things will be going much more quickly around. Things like the communication pathways get faster and faster as we accelerate some of these things through the digital infrastructure that we have access to. So AI it already is impacting lots of parts of this key feedback loop that we have. But the way that happens, the leadership around that, depends on how the leadership is as a system property. And as I've said, I think that resides primarily with vendors right now, which isn't a happy place to be. So let's talk about where it is. So are the leaders, so by this I kind of mean the chief exec, the exec team, etc., are they equipped for AI? I think we'd be seeing something a bit different if they were. But I think there's a better question to ask than that. Are they equipped for digital? Where's our digital leadership capability reside in the sector? With the vendors or with that registered providers? On boards of registered providers, often now there's a skills-based approach to that, and digital will be part of that skill set, which is really great. If you look on the exec side, it's very rare, particularly if you've only got 3 or 4 execs, for one of them, the C-level execs, it's very rare for one of them to have some sort of digital or data-driven specialism. Very rare. And that's sort of, even though data is running all of our organizations, data and digital infrastructure it isn't seen as being that real backbone. I think that there's some sort of historical reasons we could unpick about why that's happened. And I think it's a fairly familiar story in local authorities. It's shifted in central government to being an understanding that digital is absolutely central to the provision of good quality services. Is our current system configuration likely to lead to effective use of AI in its current state? My view on this is no, it's not going to end up with great outcomes for the organization or for customers. And so I think we need to re-architect some of this system, and that's part of what I hope I've pointed towards here, about how we should be building the capability within the registered providers to really scrutinize vendors, but also to support organizations like HACT in making that ecosystem more effective. Part of what we've been doing with Haley is making these reusable assets freely available, so they're under Creative Commons licenses, so that people can pick them up and use them. And we're trying to build that sort of leadership capability from within the sector, because that's the way it's going to deliver the best value for tenants and for the organizations that are serving those tenants. Cool. So it's like slightly high level, right, for this first section. Second section, we get a little bit more instantiated. Okay, so I hope that you'll kind of follow through with some of this and stay with me as we go through. So governance and ethics. I've kind of expanded out the ethics part of this to include a bit about governance, because I think that's really important in terms of how we deliver on those ethical promises. So AI governance and ethics. I kind of think that most of what I get asked about is really stuff that's been around for a long time. It's just that housing providers have noticed, essentially because of ChatGPT. So if you look at like this ship on the right, this big data type stuff, so predictive analytics, etc., been around for a really long time. So I was doing stuff at Tesco 15 years ago that was, registered providers would love to be at the level that Tesco was at 15 years ago. It's a long way off where we are today. But it's becoming more present as organizations are needing to adapt to provide better services, to understand their customer. And you can't demonstrate that you understand your customer at scale through these sort of qualitative interactions without having real data underpinning that. And the consumer standards actually, I think, have progressed that quite a lot as well in England. What there is quite a focus on in terms of boards thinking about AI is around the kind of risk side. That's quite natural. Things like data leakage, public exposure to the kind of risks, the sort of IP risk associated with some of the things being done, hallucinations. Yes, those are all very specific things about Gen AI. So hallucinations is specific about Gen AI, but really they're part of a whole family of data systems things. The governance fundamentals are exactly the same as they have been since digital systems were involved in managing homes, which is for quite a long time. Fairness, privacy, accountability, and bias. And I think it actually concerns me a bit when the narrative is about AI in this, because it sort of shows some of the underpinning data governance and the IT governance, and particularly the shadow IT governance, or the understanding and the grip around that, is probably not where it needs to be. I'll unpack that really concretely for you now. So this left column is what is AI governance in my view, and on the right is stuff that isn't AI governance. So I think it's best to kind of focus on the right just as we start this. So things like data minimization, necessity justification, transparency, STARS, so like the subject access requests, data accuracy, so all of the data integrity risk stuff that we've got coming in, becoming more and more visible, cybersecurity, protocols for responses, things like access control, so like zero trust architectures, things like data protection and GDPR compliance. All of that is not AI governance. You need to have that. That needs to be controlled and governed at a more abstract level over more things than just your generative AI tooling. I think that's crucial to understand. Things that are related to AI and machine learning are around fairness testing and demographic disparity analysis, explainability standards, things like model algorithm-specific accuracy testing, how we measure the success of things, model drift monitoring, fairness monitoring dashboards, how we're making sure that vendor accountability for AI, rather than like there's a whole like where the accountability resides, but around procurement, I think we need to be much more robust in our IT procurement, but specifically around our machine learning, so that the accountability resides in the right place. Meaningful oversight standards with humans involved, adversarial testing of algorithms, etc. Gen AI use case policies, and we'll hear some more about some of that sort of stuff later. Workforce impact assessment. So you'll be aware that AI is really reshaping the global economy, and it's changed a lot, or it's certainly played a role in some of the unemployment figures that we're seeing around graduates, because some of the more entry-level jobs are largely being automated now. We need to work at like the strategic elements around working out how the workforce and the skills that we need is going to reshape and is reshaping needs. That's part of the AI piece, I think. And something that I think is absolutely crucial in the kind of space where we operate is intersectionality-aware fairness assessment, making sure that anything that we do, we're not just using the kind of like big bucket clusters to try to understand the impact on customers, but we're really going down that personalized route to say that a particular particular person will be impacted in this way potentially by this algorithm. So that intersectionality thing, if you're not familiar with this, is kind of like the lived experience of a black man plus a white woman is not the same as the lived experience of a black woman. Sort of making sure that we're really being mindful about those different experiences that people have and the effect of those different the different demographic aspects or the different lived experience on that. It doesn't mean we don't need to get the stuff on the right that isn't AI governance right. We really do, and it's really important. It's more important than getting all fancy with your AI stuff, is making sure you've got the basics right. And there are some people that are doing good work in this space, and people like Claire Patterson around the GDPR side of things. So that's mostly where we're at in terms of thinking about AI ethics in housing. It's basically like the stuff on the right with a tiny bit of people. There's some providers thinking about things on the left. But I think we've got more important questions to ask as we go through this journey. What does AI mean inside people's homes? What's the relationship with IoT and your landlord? And what could AI mean for the relationship between a tenant and a landlord? With Gen AI, we can make new apps, new web pages really quickly. How does that change some of the co-design that we might be able to do? And like I said, I would keep the reinvention in a box, so I'll keep that in a box for now. But I think there's the more radical overhaul around how our service provision works and about how the relationship between the tenant and the landlord works. That we almost have a duty to be exploring that as a sector, so that we can see if there's some significantly better way of serving providing decent homes that people can afford, which is sort of our purpose. Cool. So now, part 3, practical AI for customer outcomes. So what we'll do here is there will be some specific examples, but I'd like to think about what that sort of customer outcome means. So basically, choose your model. So we've got things like Cynefin, we've got OODA loops, which are like from the military: observe, orient, decide, act. We've got build, measure, learn. We've got plan, do, check, act. Basically, I kind of don't care. Your organization will have its own model for doing stuff, but essentially it's get some data, try something, you'll get an outcome, learn from it. And I think with AI, we need to be doing that as well. I think we probably need to do a better job of it in general with innovation in housing, but I think this is sort of the pattern. If you get that data, try, outcome, learn kind of loop, thinking again about part 1. So we've got this kind of really complex ecosystem where the leadership is this system property, but it kind of resides a little bit spread out. And in terms of digital leadership, it's residing kind of primarily with vendors and consultancies, primarily really with vendors. And we've got these feedback loops that are going to get faster. And we need decent homes that people can afford. So the leadership of this is, unless we do something about it, right in this conversation, the leadership will end up being people selling you stuff. That is literally what the leadership will look like. We need to make sure that outcome of decent homes that people can afford, that is central to how we're using AI. And using AI on the things which are reducing the failure demand in our system. So things that reduce the amount of pressure on repairs, which then reduces the number of complaints, etc. That, in my view, is really the place to be galvanizing effort, along with whatever quick wins your organization can find. And there's some ways that I think Ian Cresswell will be talking about in his session about Magenta and what they've been up to. It's about the outcome. It's kind of like, oh yay, I use AI to write these emails. Okay, so what? How does that help the customer? And I think that's part of the sort of challenge which I lay down as part of the thinking about the practical use of AI. So in terms of those concrete examples, as I say, Magenta in the HQN session, you'll hear some more about that later. Platformizer, so Platform, they have a property bot. So their problem was that the BI team doing all the data analysis stuff, they were spending too long writing SQL queries, really strained team. And so they built a Power Automate script that you can type in natural language, so like in English that people can understand, and it will write the SQL to speed up that BI team. So it's only impacting a small number of staff, but they're really key, and it's helped speed them up on their jobs. Golding Homes, they've been releasing power apps to their staff for things like capturing repairs in really consistent format by the staff, like field workers, and they've made them freely available to everybody. And that's why I've included this here, because if you want to have a copy of their power app, they will just give it to you. And I think that's part of what the sector needs in terms of not reinventing the wheel every single time. And we don't need, there's thousands of providers across the UK. We don't all need to be making a little app that solves a particular problem. We need to be sharing about these things and sharing the intellectual property freely across it, I think. An example from up in Scotland, so East Lothian, they do case summaries and treatment consistency with regional accents. So they've actually done, it was at ACL, it was like a really good conference for natural language processing, about how they can make sure that the voice systems are actually correctly dealing with people with different accents. And that is being used in their call systems in order to sort of do the summaries and to do the treatment consistency to make sure that people are having that fair treatment. I think that's kind of neat. It's an unusual case of genuinely requiring cutting edge research to deliver on a particular kind of housing shaped problem. So I quite like that. This, I haven't validated this at all, but this data was from Perplexity. I basically just put in, give me a load of examples of AI use cases in housing, and it went off and did it. So you got like Mobisoft, NEC, etc., Microsoft, blah, 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 together with which housing associations are doing it and so on. I haven't validated that at all. The couple that I had a look at, there was no proper evaluation. And again, if you think about the outcome side of things, there's basically no evaluation done even by the vendors. So I guess as you're looking for those practical use cases, I'd be really encouraging you to push hard on the vendors to say, hey, you're trying to sell me this thing. Give me the actual numbers, and go and talk to your colleagues in other providers that have done that and make sure you're getting that full evaluation before you implement something, and that you have that mechanism to learn from the trial that you run, so that you've got the mechanism to scale it up if it's working or to fold it down. I think a frustration, particularly on the Microsoft side, is we have thousands of providers doing co-pilot trials, and yet I don't know anybody that's killed the trial and stopped it, and I know only a few that have really scaled it up, and these trials have been running for often over a year. And so either it's a waste of money or you're not getting the value from what was a successful trial. So either one is not really a good outcome for the organization. And I think, again, it comes down to that sort of that loop, that feedback loop, which is about trying things and then learning from them, making sure that the organization has that capability. But again, if you don't have the leadership residing within the organization to lead on that stuff, then the vendor's going to lead on it, and they'll just be trying to like sell some licenses, and it'll get stuck in a procurement cycle or something similar to this. So I think that's sort of a challenge to watch out for. So kind of trying to bring this together. So social housing is long-term. What we're doing is really long-term stuff. The customer outcomes that we need to achieve are long-term, and that means that our practical actions need to be quite long-term as well. The sector demands better value for money urgently. There's a few things that I think we should be doing about that. Data standards. So HACT has the UK housing data standards that it's published. Things like that, complying with those kind of standards, mean that we're in a much better position to be able to share. HACT's UK Hive, which is launching in spring 2026, is another really great place for us to be able to try to solve some of this problem. There's two things that are really very related to AI, in my view, within that. So they've got different streams. So one is the data stream, which is where this will come up naturally. And the other is the customer stream, because this is about, I think part of what we can be doing here is really using it to listen properly to our customers at scale. Do we need some analytics standards across the housing sector? I don't know, but it would seem like if we're all making arrears models, which I know many of us are, if you're making an arrears model, why are we not doing that together? And why are we not sort of sharing some of that practice and using the data that we have together, or at least just not reinventing the wheel every time? Shared assets across the sector. So again, housingai.org, we've got some stuff that we've been building out together. So there's like an AI guide for IT directors, which was written by a few of us in the committee, in the organizing committee, and IT directors that are getting pressure from boards to deliver AI and don't know where to start. And essentially it goes, sort your cyber out, and then step through how you go about doing that. And I hope that's useful. It certainly had very good feedback, so I'm hopeful that will be of use to people. And finally, the sector's overseen tragedies, which we have a duty to avert. Many housing associations don't satisfy compliance requirements. There are 1.3 million families on the waiting list, and this is rising. So there's stuff we really need to achieve. It's up to us to use data to uncover what's really stopping us, not just what we reckon, but what's really stopping us. And then we can try to solve those problems using the resources we have available, our fantastic staff, and potentially part of that is going to include AI. Thanks for listening.